My husband screamed through my phone, "Wire me my $3,000, or I'll divorce you." He said it like he was holding a knife to my throat. He said it like the word divorce still had the power to make me beg. But I was standing in the quiet hallway of a courthouse in Cleveland, Ohio, with a stamped envelope in my hand and a new life waiting on the other side of the door. The judge had signed the final order 20 minutes earlier. My marriage was already over. The strange part was not that I felt sad. The strange part was that I felt light. For 10 years, Landon Price had lived off my paycheck. 10 years of temporary help. 10 years of me paying the mortgage, the utilities, his car insurance, his credit cards, his gym membership, his lunches, his suits, his business networking, and every little emergency that somehow always became my fault. And every month, like clockwork, he demanded $3,000 from me. He called it his household allowance. I called it the price of peace. At least, I used to. That morning, when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket, I already knew it was him before I looked. Landon had a talent for ruining quiet moments. He could sense peace from miles away and break it with a single call. I stepped away from my attorney, pressed the phone to my ear, and said, "Hello." His voice exploded before I could breathe. "Finally. Where is my money, Natalie?" I looked down at the envelope in my hand. My name was printed on the front in black ink, Natalie Price. Soon I would file the paperwork to restore my maiden name. Soon, that last piece of him would be gone too. "What money?" I asked. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't play stupid with me. My $3,000. You were supposed to wire it yesterday." I didn't forget. "Then why isn't it in my account?" "Because I was done feeding the man who had been starving me." But I did not say that yet. Instead, I stood under the courthouse lights and watched people pass by carrying folders, holding hands, wiping tears, whispering with lawyers. A young woman sat on a bench across from me, staring at the floor like she had just survived something. I knew that look. I had worn it for years. "I had other things to handle," I said. That was when Landon's voice dropped into the tone I knew too well. Slow, threatening, almost patient. "You listen to me carefully. I have allowed you to difficult for long enough. Wire me the money before noon, or I will divorce you. I mean it this time. I will take half of everything, and I will make sure everyone knows what kind of wife you are." Behind me, Miriam Caldwell stopped walking. She heard him. She raised one eyebrow. I almost smiled. Landon did not know the phone was on speaker. He did not know I had started recording after the first sentence. He did not know that Miriam had told me for weeks. When he threatens you, let him talk. Controlling people often destroy themselves because they cannot stay quiet. So I let him talk. "Are you listening?" he snapped. "Yes, Landon. I'm listening? You better be. You think because you make a little corporate salary, you can humiliate me. You think I don't know how to punish you? I built you. Without me, you would still be some nervous little woman working an entry-level job and apologizing for breathing." A year earlier, that sentence would have made my stomach twist. Now, I only heard evidence. He kept going. "You owe me. A wife supports her husband. A wife does not question how money is spent. A wife does not embarrass a man in front of his contacts. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "Good. Then wire the money." "I can't do that." The silence on his end was sharp. "What did you say?" I said I can't do that. His breathing changed. I could picture him perfectly. Pacing through our kitchen in the house my salary had paid for, wearing the expensive watch I bought him for his 40th birthday. Standing beside the granite counter he told people he installed with his business profits. "Are you trying to make me angry?" he asked. "No. Because if I get angry, Natalie, you will not like what happens next." Miriam quietly mouthed, "Keep him talking." I swallowed once. Not from fear. From memory. I remembered every time he had used that tone. Every time he had stood in a doorway and blocked me from leaving a room. Every time he had taken my car keys to teach me a lesson. Every time he had laughed when I cried, then told me I was unstable. 10 years is a long time to be trained to obey. It took me almost as long to learn how to stop. "Landon," I said carefully, "what exactly will happen if I don't send the money?" He made a sound of disgust. "First, I'll call your mother. Then your boss. Then your sister. I'll tell them you're having some kind of breakdown. I'll tell them you're hiding marital assets. I'll tell them you abandoned your husband and left him without money." There was threat number 1. "What else?" I asked. "What else?" he repeated, amazed. "You need a list now." "Fine. I'll clean out the joint account. I'll sell your grandmother's jewelry. I'll cancel your health insurance. I'll tell the court you're mentally unfit. And if you think that fancy lawyer can save you, you're more stupid than I thought." Miriam's face went still. My grandmother's jewelry was not marital property. It was mine, locked in a safe in the upstairs closet. Or it had been. For the first time that morning, Real heat moved through my chest. Landon, I said, did you open my safe? He paused 1 second too long. Then he laughed. A husband cannot steal from his own wife. Miriam closed her eyes for a moment, as if silently thanking him. I looked at the envelope in my hand again. Inside were the divorce decree, the temporary financial restraining order, and copies of the evidence we had already filed: bank statements, credit card bills, photographs, private investigator reports, text messages, and one video that still made my hands go cold. The video showed Landon walking into a luxury hotel in Columbus with a woman named Brielle Hart. She was 28. She called him baby, and the hotel room had been paid for with the card I used to buy groceries. 3 months earlier, I would never have believed my life could become a folder of evidence. Back then, I was still living in the fog. I woke up every morning at 5:30, made coffee, packed my lunch, checked Landon's calendar because he hated being surprised, and drove 40 minutes to my job at a healthcare software company. I managed vendor contracts. It was not glamorous, but I was good at it. I was careful, organized, and calm under pressure. At work, people respected me. At home, Landon aided me like an ATM with bad posture. He had not held a steady job in 7 years. He said he was a business consultant. He said he was between major opportunities. He said people were jealous of his vision. He said men like him could not waste time on small salaries. But his consulting business had no clients, no office, and no income. It did have expenses: expensive restaurants, golf weekends, designer shirts, hotel charges, rideshare receipts at 2 a.m, cash withdrawals he called professional flexibility. Whenever I asked questions, he attacked. You don't understand business. You have a poverty mindset. You should be grateful I let you manage the boring bills. The first time he asked me for $3,000, he said it was temporary. He had a deal coming through. He just needed 1 month of support. 1 month became 10 years. I gave up vacations. I delayed dental work. I drove the same old car, while he leased a black SUV, because he said appearances mattered. I wore shoes until the soles thinned, because he needed new suits for meetings that never existed. And still, I told myself marriage was sacrifice. The truth found me by accident. One evening, I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner when Landon's tablet lit up on the counter. I was not looking for anything. I was wiping sauce from the marble because he had complained that I left streaks. Then a message appeared. Brielle, last night was perfect. Same hotel next week. And don't forget, you promised to help with my rent. $3,000 would be amazing. I stood there with the cloth in my hand and felt things inside me separate from my body. Not break. Separate. I looked at the message until the screen went dark. Then I looked at my own hands. Dishwater dripped from my fingers onto the floor. I did not scream. I did not confront him. I did not throw the tablet. Because suddenly, every mystery had an answer. The missing money, the cologne, the secret calls, the way he guarded his phone, the way he criticized my body while buying new clothes for himself, the way he said I was lucky he stayed. He was not staying out of love. He was staying because I was useful. That night, while he slept beside me, I opened a private email account. The next morning, I contacted a divorce attorney. By the end of the week, I had hired a private investigator. His name was Victor Reyes. He was quiet, polite, and careful in the way former police officers often are. He asked me what I wanted. The truth, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. People say that until they get it. I already know enough to leave, I said. I need enough to protect myself. He nodded. Then we'll build it clean. For the next 7 weeks, I became 2 women. At home, I was still Natalie Price, obedient wife, careful voice, quiet footsteps, the woman who transferred money because arguing cost more than paying. Outside, I was a woman collecting her life back one document at a time. I opened a new bank account at a different bank. I changed passwords. I copied tax returns. I photographed receipts. I downloaded statements going back years. I found charges for hotels in 3 cities, dinners for 2, jewelry I had never received, and rent payments to an apartment building downtown. Brielle's building. Victor followed Landon twice. Both times, Landon spent the afternoon with Brielle, while telling me he had client meetings. One photograph showed him carrying flowers. Another showed him kissing her outside a restaurant where one steak cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Then came the video. Landon and Brielle in a hotel lobby laughing. He had his hand on her lower back. She leaned into him like she owned him. And maybe she did. But I owned the credit card statement. That mattered more. Miriam Caldwell reviewed everything with the calm focus of a surgeon. Financial abuse, she said. Dissipation of marital assets. Coercive threats. Possible theft if he accessed separate property. We need to move before he realizes you know. I'm scared. I admitted. Good, she said. Fear keeps you careful. But fear does not get to make decisions anymore. That sentence became my anchor. Fear does not get to make decisions anymore, quietly. Because Landon avoided mail, Unless it looked like a check, service took planning. Miriam arranged for him to be served at the shared office space he still rented to impress imaginary clients. But Landon was not there. He had not paid for the office in months. The receptionist said his mail had been piling up. So the process server tried again at the gym, then at Brielle's apartment. That was where they found him. He accepted the papers in a designer tracksuit I had paid for, outside a building I had helped fund without knowing it. According to the process server's notes, he looked confused at first, then furious. Then he said, "She'll regret this." He was right. Someone was going to regret something. It just was not going to be me. The temporary orders froze the joint account and stopped either of us from selling or transferring property. Landon was ordered not to harass me, not to contact my employer, and not to dispose of any personal property. He ignored every line. That is why, on the morning the divorce was finalized, his phone call mattered so much. He thought he was threatening a frightened wife. He was actually handing my attorney a gift. Back in the courthouse hallway, I asked one more question. "Landon, are you saying you will sell my grandmother's jewelry unless I wire you money?" "I'm saying you better remember who controls that house." That wasn't my question. "You always did need everything explained like a child." "Yes, Natalie. If you don't wire me my money, I will start selling whatever I have to sell. Jewelry, furniture, your laptop, maybe even that ridiculous piano you never play. You brought this on yourself." Miriam touched my sleeve and nodded. "Enough?" I took a breath. "Landon," I said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully." "Oh, now you have a speech." "The court ended our marriage this morning." Silence. For the first time in 10 years, I heard Landon Price run out of words. I continued softly. "The divorce is final. The financial restraining order is still active. You were served. You violated the order by threatening to sell my separate property and by trying to extort money from me." My attorney heard this call. "It is recorded." His voice came back, but it was different now. Not powerful, not smooth. Panicked. "You can't record me? In Ohio?" "I can record a call when I'm part of the conversation." "You set me up." "No, Landon. I stopped protecting you from yourself." He cursed so loudly a woman down the hallway turned her head. Then he made his worst mistake. "You think a piece of paper stops me? I'm at the house right now. I can burn your whole life down before you even get here." Miriam's expression changed instantly. I knew that look. It was the look of a door opening. She took the phone from my hand and spoke for first time. "Mr. Price, this is Miriam Caldwell, counsel for Ms. Price. You are hereby instructed not to remove, damage, sell, or destroy any property inside that residence. Law enforcement will be contacted." He laughed. "You don't scare me? You should be scared of the recording you just made for us," Miriam said. Then she ended the call. For 3 seconds, the hallway felt too quiet. My knees trembled. Miriam put one hand under my elbow. "Breathe." "I'm breathing." "You're holding your breath." I exhaled. She was already calling someone. Her voice turned crisp and professional. She contacted the sheriff's office, then the local police near the house, then the court clerk to document the violation. By noon, we were in her car heading toward the house I had paid for and never felt safe inside. The closer we got, the more memories pressed against me. The front porch where Landon had proposed with tears in his eyes. The dining room where he later mocked the way I chewed. The bedroom where I learned to pretend to sleep so he would stop lecturing me. The kitchen where I had opened bank apps with shaking hands and sent money I could not afford to send. A home can become a cage so slowly you keep calling it home long after the lock clicks shut. When we turned onto my street, 2 police cars were already parked outside. My heart jumped. The front door stood open. A cardboard box sat on the porch. One of my winter coats hung halfway out of it, one sleeve dragging across the dirty wood. Landon was on the lawn yelling at an officer. Brielle stood beside his SUV with sunglasses on top of her head and a designer bag on her shoulder. She looked annoyed, not afraid. Like this was an inconvenience, not the collapse of a stolen life. When Landon saw me, his face twisted. He started toward me, but the officer stepped in front of him. Miriam moved beside me. "Do not engage." But I did look at him, really looked. For years he had seemed larger than the room. Now he looked smaller in daylight, puffy eyes, angry mouth, expensive clothes that suddenly looked like costume pieces. "What did you do?" he shouted. I did not answer. The officer approached me. "Ma'am, are you Natalie Price?" "Lies. We received a report of possible violation of a court order. Your attorney provided documentation." "Mr. Price was removing items from the residence when we arrived." "Items?" I asked. The officer glanced toward the porch. My safe was there. My safe. The small gray one I kept in the closet. It had scratch marks around the keypad. Something inside me went cold and quiet again. Miriam saw it too. "That safe contains separate property belonging to my client." Landon shouted. It's my house too. Miriam did not look at him. Not anymore. Brielle removed her sunglasses from her head. Landon, what is she talking about? For the first time, I saw confusion brain turn her confidence. Landon turned on her. That one phrase changed her face. Maybe she had believed his version of himself. Maybe he told her he was a wealthy consultant trapped with an ungrateful wife. Maybe he told her the house, the car, and the money were his. Now she was standing on my lawn watching police guard my safe while his lies fell apart in public. The officer asked Landon to step back. He refused. He grabbed the handle of the safe. Sir, let go. This is mine. Sir, let go now. Landon looked at me with pure hate. Tell them, Natalie. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. There it was. The old command. Fix this for me. Protect me. Make my consequences disappear. For 10 years, I would have done it. I would have apologized to the officers. I would have begged Miriam to soften things. I would have explained that Landon was under stress. But fear did not get to make decisions anymore. I looked at the officer and said, "It is not a misunderstanding." Landon's face drained of color. He was arrested for violating the court order and attempting to remove protected property. The charges would be decided later. Miriam reminded me not to exaggerate, not to celebrate, not to speak beyond facts. But I will tell the truth here. When they put him in handcuffs, I did not feel joy. I felt space. Like a window had opened in a room where I had been suffocating for years. Brielle watched him with her mouth open. He shouted at her to call someone. She did not move. Then she turned to me. Did he really not own the house? I almost laughed, but it came out tired. No, he lived in it. He said he paid for everything. I know. Her eyes flicked toward the SUV. What about the car, leased? In my name? The color left her cheeks. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I remembered the message about her rent. I remembered the hotel. I remembered every month I ate cheap soup at my desk, while my husband bought her dinners with my money. Miriam stepped in. M's heart, you may be contacted as part of ongoing financial proceedings. It would be wise to preserve any records of funds or gifts you received from Mr. Price. Brielle looked like she might faint. Good, I thought. Let the truth make everyone dizzy. The next weeks were not as dramatic as movies make revenge look. There were no slow-motion walks away from explosions. No instant justice. No perfect speech that fixed a decade of harm. There were forms. Hearings, bank appointments, insurance changes, locks with authority lists, emails, calls with accountants. More tears than I expected. Some nights I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom and shook, not because I wanted Landon back, but because my body had spent so long bracing for him that peace felt unfamiliar. Healing is not always soft. Sometimes healing is changing passwords. Sometimes healing is sleeping with the lights off, because no one will burst through the door to yell. Sometimes healing is buying the good coffee, because you finally understand that your comfort is not a crime. The financial investigation uncovered more than I expected. Landon had opened 2 credit cards using my information. He had signed my name on a loan application. He had transferred money from the joint account to Brielle several times, labeling the payments as consulting reimbursements. He had sold a necklace a month earlier and told the buyer it belonged to his late mother. My late grandmother's necklace. That one nearly broke me. When Miriam showed me the listing, I had to leave the room. My grandmother had worn that necklace every Sunday. She smelled like rose lotion and peppermint candies. When she gave it to me before she died, she said, "Never let anyone make you feel small, baby." And then I had let Landon make me small for 10 years, but not forever. Miriam filed claims for recovery and sanctions. My company's legal department became involved when we discovered he had emailed my boss, claiming I was unstable and misusing company travel for affairs. Unfortunately for Landon, he sent the email after the court order told him not to contact my employer. My boss, Denise, called me into her office 2 days later. I walked in ready to explain. She closed the door and said, "Natalie, I don't believe a word of what he wrote." I sat down too quickly. She continued, "Your work record is excellent. Your travel was approved. Your reports are clean. I'm sorry you're dealing with this." That kindness nearly undid me. For years, Landon had convinced me everyone would believe him over me. He said people saw me as weak, boring, forgettable. He said I was lucky he tolerated me. But outside his shadow, people saw me clearly. The hearing for financial sanctions took place in December. Snow had started falling that morning, soft and steady, turning the courthouse steps white. Landon arrived in a wrinkled suit. No Brielle, no expensive watch, no arrogant smile. He looked at me once, then away. In court, Miriam presented the recordings, the bank records, the hotel receipts, the forged documents, and the proof that he had tried to remove my safe after being ordered not to. Landon's attorney tried to paint him as desperate, unemployed, emotionally distressed. The judge listened. Then she looked at Landon and said, "Desperation does not authorize coercion. Unemployment does not authorize theft. A marriage license does not grant ownership over another person. I wrote that sentence down. The court ordered Landon to repay a significant portion of the dissipated funds. He was held responsible for my attorney fees related to the violations. The fraudulent accounts were referred for further review. The SUV was returned. The house remained mine under the settlement, because the down payment came from my separate inheritance, and every payment had come from my salary. It was not everything. Nothing gives back 10 years. But justice rarely looks like getting everything back. Sometimes it looks like finally stopping the bleeding. After the hearing, Landon waited near the elevators. Miriam noticed before I did. "We can use the side exit." "No," I said. "I'm okay." He stepped into my path. For 1 second, my body remembered being afraid. My shoulders tightened. My pulse jumped. Then I remembered the judge, the order, my new locks, my new account, my quiet house. Landon's voice was low. "You looked at him, really looked." "No," I said. "I audited you." His mouth tightened. "You'll regret this when you're alone." I smiled then. Not because I was cruel. Because he still thought alone was the worst thing a woman could be. He never understood. I had been alone for years inside that marriage. Alone while paying bills. Alone while eating dinner across from a man who mocked me. Alone while lying in bed beside someone who only touched me when he wanted something. Alone while shrinking myself so his ego could fill the room. My new solitude was different. It had sunlight in it. "I'm not afraid of being alone," I told him. "I'm afraid of becoming small again." He had no answer for that. I walked past him. Outside, the snow touched my face and melted. Miriam walked beside me without speaking. At the curb, my phone vibrated. For a moment, old fear flashed. Then I looked down. It was a message from Denise. "Contract renewal approved. Congratulations. Also, take tomorrow off. You earned it." I laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of me in the cold air. That night, I went home to a quiet house. My house. The locks were new. The rooms were half empty. The walls still held marks where Landon's oversized television had been mounted, where his framed business awards had hung, where his expensive coats had crowded the closet. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, I opened my banking app without fear. No transfer. No $3,000. No apology. No price for peace. I slept 8 hours. In the months that followed, I rebuilt slowly. I sold the SUV and bought a modest car in my own name. I turned Landon's office into a reading room. I found a local jeweler who helped me track down my grandmother's necklace through the buyer. It took time, paperwork, and more money than I wanted to spend. But one Friday afternoon, the necklace came home. I held it in my hands and cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. Not because it was expensive. Because it was proof that not everything stolen stays gone. My mother visited in spring. She walked through the house, touched the fresh paint in the hallway, and said, "It feels different here." "It is different?" I said. She looked at me gently. "So are you." I thought about that for a long time. Maybe I was different. Or maybe I was finally becoming the woman I would have been if nobody had spent 10 years teaching me to apologize for existing. On the first anniversary of my divorce, I did something small. I set up an automatic transfer from my checking account. $3,000. But not to Landon. I sent it to my savings account. The memo line said "for my freedom." Then I took myself to dinner at the same restaurant where Victor had photographed Landon and Brielle. I wore a black dress, my grandmother's necklace, and the kind of red lipstick Landon used to call too much. The hostess asked, "One tonight?" I smiled. "Yes," I said, "just me." She led me to a table near the window. I ordered steak, dessert, and the good coffee. I ate slowly. I watched people pass under the city lights. No one criticized how I held my fork. No one checked my phone. No one asked me to prove I deserved the meal. When the bill came, I paid with my own card. The receipt printed clean and simple. For years, Landon had told me divorce would destroy me. He was wrong. Divorce did not destroy my life. It destroyed the lie that his life was mine to fund. And when I walked out into the warm evening air, I understood something I wish I had known sooner. A threat only works while you still fear losing what is already hurting you. The day Landon screamed, "Wire my money, or I'll divorce you," he thought he was ending my world. But the court had already ended our marriage. And I had already begun my life.